Dr. Emily Splichal, functional podiatrist and human movement specialist, is the founder of EBFA Global, formerly Evidence Based Fitness Academy, creator of the Barefoot Training Specialist certification, author of Barefoot Strong, and inventor of Nabosco Barefoot technology. With over 19 years in the fitness industry, Dr. Splichal has dedicated her medical career towards studying postural alignment and human movement as it relates to barefoot science, foot to core integration, and sensory integration. Welcome, Emily. Great to have you here today. How are you?
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be a guest on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure as well. So you are currently a podiatrist and a human movement specialist and you're working out of New York. I wanted to just maybe for you to tell me and our viewers how why you got interested in human movement or in the feet and gait patterns, like how that all came up.
Yeah, so it's sometimes people are a little bit surprised on, why I would choose to specialize in feet. It's not a common or maybe attractive part of the body, but my background is in fitness. Actually, it started in movement. So I was a competitive gymnast, which means that I just moved my entire, childhood, teenage years. Movement and the discipline around movement was very important to me. And it's a barefoot sport, which will play an important role later in my career. And then from there, I eventually got into fitness, and I was teaching classes and training clients, appreciated movement, again, because of a gymnast, and then getting into fitness. And then I found myself getting injured. So I kept getting injured as a instructor, group exercise instructor, and just trying to stay active despite having 13 years as a competitive gymnast. I was starting to get a little bit injured. So I knew that a lifetime career in fitness where my tool is my body was potentially risky. So I started looking at graduate school, medical school, and how could I use what I loved about fitness and movement, but apply that into a career in a different way that had security without using my body as the tool. Long story short, I eventually came across podiatry and had no experience with podiatry, but was able to softly connect it back to movement, to runners and dancers and gymnasts. And started podiatry schools. I went through it. I actually realized that it's a very segregated profession. Doesn't look at the body from an integrated perspective. It's very much the foot is there and it's not connected to the rest of the body, which just didn't sit well with me, especially having been an athlete and then been in fitness. So I tried to connect it as much as I could, but was having a really hard time. So what I did is, as I was going through residency for podiatry to be trained as a surgeon, I actually took a break. I left and went back to school, to graduate school, where I got my master's in human movement. And the graduate degree in human movement is what allowed me to connect what I appreciated as an athlete and a fitness professional with what I was now as a podiatrist and a professional of feet, and kind of connect them both with the movement element. So really those three facets coming together is how I shape my practice, how I see patients. I travel all around the world educating other professionals how I look at feet, and then that led to the evolution of Naboso, which is a product line that I developed around enhancing feet. So it was a little bit of a unique journey, but I think that it's an important journey that I now am trying to teach the next generation of podiatrists, that the foot is not as isolated as we are taught in podiatry school, and that really we as podiatrists are movement specialists. I treat movement, I don't treat feet. And we really need all of the podiatrists to say that. We actually need orthopedists and anyone who does sports medicine and deals with the musculoskeletal system to really say, I treat movement, not a joint or not a tendon, or just the foot is isolated. So trying to bring that integrated approach to what I do, and then the medical community in general.
I think that's so important because there's many doctors that I've talked to, and even just many clients that I talk to, and we go to specialists for something, and I mean, we need specialists, but they're so focused on, a specific area of the body. And sometimes, depending on, their background and their education and what they choose to believe in, they don't take into account that oftentimes, that more of that holistic approach, that there's so many other things that are leading, that are in the equation, and not just maybe that organ or that muscle, or that part of the body. So
Right.
I love that you take that approach.
Yeah, and it's not at the fault of the doctor per se or the therapist. It's just that's what they're taught in school, graduate school, medical school. But now with the internet and the increasing education to the patient or to the consumer or the end user individual, that they now feel empowered that they can kind of challenge what the white coat tells them, where normally, we're looking at it historically, you just trust what your doctor says. And I realized, being on the inside, that the person with the white coat, they're just a human as well. So when they make mistakes, they're biased in a certain way. It's human nature to be biased. You want to be correct. You want to be valid. That's the ego. But when we are a medical professional or dealing with another human being, especially if their health is in our hands, we need to be as objective as we can versus kind of swaying that bias.
Knowing now that the core is not a separate entity and it can influence other parts of the body, can you talk about how the foot or gait pattern can influence the core when it comes to its function and strength?
Absolutely. So your feet are obviously connected to your core. That's everything that I speak about. I actually have a concept or a philosophy of how I look at my patients, which is called foot to core sequencing. And the first layer of that foot to core sequencing that I want the listeners to appreciate is that our foot is our body's foundation. We understand that, we appreciate it, that the only contact point between the body and the ground is the foot. So that means it's going to have an influence on our posture, our alignment, how we stabilize, how we interact with the ground, how each step is coordinated. It's a really very powerful structure. Now, the power of the foot from a foundation perspective is that it's in two ways. It's in a biomechanical way or a kinematic way, which means that if you have flat feet, everything up the chain is going to start to kind of collapse inward or roll inward. And that just has to do with, the foot bone being connected to the leg bone, which is connected to the femur, right? So we're all connected.
Like the song.
People, exactly. And people can feel that if they stand up, even as they're listening to this, if a person stands up and they roll their foot to the inside and the outside of the foot, they will feel or see that their knees are knocking in, the knees knock out. If you put your hands on your hips, you'll feel that the hip is moving, the leg is rotating, the pelvis is moving forward and back. So that means that if you move your foot and it moves your pelvis forward or back, and the pelvis is obviously where your core is, you now have a foot-core connection, right? Or an influence that goes from the ground up. It all also obviously can go top down as well. So those mechanical movements is the first way. If you have a foot that is falling inward and flat, and you feel your hips, you will feel that you roll inward and your pelvis rocks forward. From a core stability perspective, when your pelvis is in an anterior tilt or tilted forward, that is a unstable position because it puts the pelvic floor and the deep core muscles in a disadvantaged position. They kind of shut off, for a loose way of describing it, which means that any muscle around the pelvis that requires a stable core is also going to be unstable now, or maybe a little less active. We'll take the glutes as an example. If your core is not stable, your glutes are not strong. best analogy, right? I think of it as if you're trying to jump off of, you're on the water and you're trying to jump off of a paddleboard or a surfboard into the water, you can't generate a lot of power because the surfboard is not on a stable base, versus if you jump off of, you know, the dock, right? You obviously can jump further. So it kind of helps people appreciate the association of strength on a stable or unstable base. So that's the biomechanical way or the kinematic way. Now, the other way, that is the way that I really focus on and my passion sits around, is in the sensory or myofascial way that your feet connect to your core. And in the body, every muscle is connected to another muscle, just kind of like a bone is connected to another bone, etc. That for the coordination of the human body and movement, we have to be integrated. Otherwise, it's just not efficient. It doesn't make sense from a survival perspective. So one muscle blends into another muscle, which blends into another muscle. And those connections happen to be called fascial lines. Fascia is the tissue that surrounds the muscle, and that's what makes you continuous. That there is a fascial line from the tips of the toes, bottom of the foot, through the lower leg and your inner thigh, through your pelvic floor to your diaphragm, and it continues all the way up. So that fascial connection between your feet and your core is just as important to appreciate as the mechanical one. And what this connects to is more the muscles and the muscle strength of your feet. That if the muscle strength of your feet is weak or collapsing or delayed, it continues up the rest of the chain to then be delayed into the pelvic floor and the deep core muscles. So then that connection from your feet all the way to your deep core muscles via the fascial line is, because it's fascial, it's actually faster. It's a fast connection between your feet and your core. Versus if I think of it as, you know, the feet roll in and then the core engages and then the glutes engage, it's a slower process than something that is kind of interconnected and it's happening faster than you can even blink. Like that's really what I spend my time teaching professionals and patients and everyone, that the ability to move the right way and to stabilize the right way is really just a timing game. Everything is about timing. And if you can't coordinate the timing or you can't stabilize fast enough, which is technically time, then that is where we see compensation and injury. And it literally boils down to that. Whether you talk mechanics or you talk fascia or you talk muscles or you talk proprioception, whatever you want to talk about the human body, it's about timing, because we are moving and we are dynamic beings and we have to be stable to be dynamic. And that is a timing concept to its most simplest form.
So just to ask a question, would that sort of be like if someone was in the gym and say we're doing they're lifting a weight off the ground and they've actually prepared their body and they're breathing and then they lift and that feels okay to them. And then there's another time where they just, because I hear this a lot, they just go to pick up a pen off the ground or go to reach for something and their back goes out. Is that sort of what would be timing, where their body just wasn't prepared for that movement?
That's a really good analogy that you gave, because what it's demonstrating is that one example, the example in the gym where they're doing squats, is a conscious example, right? Yes. You're in the gym, you're in the zone, you're thinking, okay, engage core, exhale, lift weight. That's a conscious movement pattern. When you are doing your day-to-day, you know, picking something off the floor, and exactly how you had said, that's where a lot of injuries happen. That's because they are subconsciously moving. So yes, it is a timing. And by saying I'm comparing a conscious movement to a subconscious movement, that affects kind of how you stabilize. Yes, the timing, but how you stabilize. So most of the injuries that I see are in subconscious movements.
Mhm.
You are, you know, walking and doing something else, right? So you're kind of distracted. And what that means is that the demands of how you're moving has to be subconsciously efficient. Otherwise, the fact that you're dual tasking is essentially what it is. For the people listening, you could think of it as like multitasking. When you multitask, the task that is technically the subconscious one is the one that has to be very fast and efficient. And if it's not, that's exactly where you see the injuries because of the timing.
So, taking into consideration the timing and that subconscious versus conscious movement pattern, is that why in the work that you do, programming and just getting back to the basics in order to create that foundation, and through that basic cueing would be really important to establish those habits?
Absolutely, yeah. So I try to reinforce, and this is important for those that are also listening that may be trainers or coaches and things like that, that it's important for you to be almost like neurotic on how you do the cueing. So when I teach classes, I teach a barefoot balance foot to core workout. And when I'm teaching it, I am continuously barking on the members of push your toe down, exhale, 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 right? Like tongue to palate, engage your hands, open your hands, toes down. Like I'm constantly giving these cues to kind of drive the conscious pattern into their subconscious. And that's where I take philosophies of being a gymnast into this, in the sense that if you think of a dancer or a gymnast or even someone who's playing piano or a musical instrument or a surgeon, whatever it is, that you're doing, like I would do my floor routine over and over and over and over, like to nauseum. And the reason is that you do it so many times that when you actually go to compete or perform the execution of that tumbling pass, you are not consciously thinking about it. You are subconsciously stabilizing. And what's actually happening is that as a gymnast is doing a tumbling pass, their nervous system is several steps ahead. So they're already stabilizing for the dismount before they actually dismount, right? And that's called pre-activation. So yes, it's a timing, but the timing is actually not like I am stabilizing as I walk. No, it's like you are anticipating that you are about to take your first step and you are stabilizing before your foot even hits the ground. That's ultimately what's happening. That might be a little bit too abstract for people to conceptualize, but there are EMG studies that validate that and show that the timing that muscles activate precedes the initiation of the movement.
That's fascinating. I never considered that before with gymnasts, that their subconscious program was running their body before their conscious movement. The programming of the subconscious mind is an area that I do explore a lot with my clients when it comes to their breath, their pelvic floor engagement, and some of those deeper core muscles. And we do a lot of visualization, a lot of guided imagery in order for it to be benefiting them as they start to move more.
Yeah, and there's a huge power behind visualization. And a great exercise that I will do that links to the core is I will have people lying on their back. And so you're just on your back with your knees bent and your feet flat on the floor, kind of like you're going to do crunches, but you're not. And your hands could be, you know, on the side of your hips if you would like. And you're engaging your pelvic floor and your transverse abdominals. And then I have them just visualize lifting a foot off of the floor. They don't actually do it, but they just visualize it. And by just simply visualizing lifting the foot, which technically would put more demand on your core because your leg weighs something, right? So you're adding resistance. what they should notice, and what they often do notice, is that when they visualize lifting their foot, they get a higher activation in the deep core and TVA. And they just get this immediate increase in tension. And that's really starting to train the pre-activation stability that's needed. So I will use visualization the same way. Is, before you come out of the squat, let's say, actually kind of in your mind visualize you're doing it and then do it, right? And you actually will drive that pre-activation response by doing that. The mind is a very powerful thing, but the visual, so that's really what you're tying into. As soon as you bring in visual input, you activate a different part of your brain that is responsible for obviously visual input. It's called the V1 cortex. And then that activates higher motor activation in the somatosensory cortex. It's really fascinating. And then auditory is the same thing.
That's incredible. So that's a great tip or a great takeaway, to do the visualization before exercises. Do you have any other tips that you could share with us, with what people might be able to do from sort of the feet up that could impact and help strengthen their core?
Absolutely. So the action that activates the core is pushing the toes down. So the toes going into the ground. This doesn't have to be at a 100% max contraction, but just appreciating that the muscle action that drives foot to core sequencing and deep core activation is the toes down, which is your long flexors. So the flexor hallucis longus, the flexor digitorum longus, they run on the bottom of the foot to the tips of the toes. Their action is obviously that, right? Not a curl. You're not doing like a towel crunch. You are anchoring or rooting or grounding, right? Kind of that cue is what you want to think. And as you push your toes down, you want to be exhaling, because the exhale drives the diaphragm connection to the deep core muscles. And you can even take it all the way up to the tongue. And if, as you push your toes into the ground, you drive your tongue to your pellet, you do toes down, tongue to pellet, and you technically engage your core at the same time, you will notice a internal stability of your system that is different than what it's like to squeeze your glutes and try to like suck in your stomach. It's a different type of stability. And that's the foundation of stability I teach for patients, clients, athletes, foot to core, toe to tongue.
So with that sort of toe grounding exercise, do you encourage people to work out barefoot then?
100%. So the reason why I am a fan of barefoot training, not barefoot running, our conversation is just working out barefoot, is one, you access all of the nerves in the bottom of the feet. So you get this sensory stimulation. The part of the brain that I was referencing earlier is somatosensory cortex, is essentially the sensory / motor center of your brain. And the more sensory that comes in, the better the movement out. So by being barefoot, you're essentially just giving your brain a lot of sensory information to better coordinate the movement. The other reason why I like barefoot training is because you get out of shoes, and the shoes can alter your mechanics or restrict your mechanics in a certain way. It might restrict your toes from moving, toes from spreading. So you kind of get the opportunity to take advantage of your full range of motion or your full foot function by being without shoes. So those are the two ways. I'm sure I could come up with like 100 reasons why you should train barefoot. Those are two.
And you would even, especially with people that have either like a high or a low arch, because I know a lot of people feel very dependent on their orthotics from what they've been told, and they feel like they need that in order to properly support. But would you say, like, are they going to get more support, and is it going to be more beneficial if they're doing, like you said, not running or, things maybe where there's a lot of impact, but if they're doing, functional based exercise in the gym or in their gym, because can't really go barefoot in the gym, but with, without having the dependence on their orthotics. And what are your thoughts on orthotics too?
Yeah, 100%. So every foot type, I truly believe that every single foot type has the ability to do some degree of barefoot training or barefoot stimulation. Now, should every foot type be doing jump rope and box jumps barefoot? No, because that's not realistic. But can you stand in one place and do your squats or do some balance exercises, standing on one leg? 1,000%. The risk to benefit kind of assessment is really on the side of sensory information is so important. So if someone is apprehensive to get out of their shoes or their orthotics because they have a certain foot type, or maybe they had plantar fasciitis in the past or something like that, you just start really slow. Start by releasing your feet, doing, your stretches barefoot. How about just that? Just do some stretches barefoot, do a little bit of, some yoga, right? And then that would be barefoot, which makes me think that it's a little bit funny that you will find people that will take yoga, but then not believe that they should work out barefoot, but they just worked out barefoot. So, and then with Pilates as well. So that could be a way if people are really not understanding how to start barefoot training because of their foot type and because they use orthotics and because they had certain injuries. So they're kind of scared to get into that barefoot environment. Totally appreciate it. Then I would say, go look at a yoga or a Pilates class. And that's essentially barefoot training. Now, is it, super focused, targeted on foot engagement and foot to core? Depends on the instructor, honestly. That there are some very good yoga and Pilates instructors who really emphasize the foot to core. Let's say you don't like Pilates or yoga, no problem. Then I would say go back to releasing your feet, do your stretches barefoot, or maybe do a few of your first squats barefoot, maybe a couple just standing on one leg. And then when you kind of got your sensory stimulus and your warm up done, then you could put your shoes back on. Totally fine, right? And then for orthotics in general, there's a time and place for orthotics, just like there's a time and place for more supportive shoes. But are they over-prescribed and over-recommended? 100%. I like orthotics for a temporary period to get someone out of pain, or a temporary / activity specific. So if you are a teacher who has to stand on your feet all day, I may say that's really stressful on the body. And with your flat feet, I'm quoting that, flat feet, you are going to potentially injure yourself a little bit easier or quicker than someone who has to stand on their feet and they have a more neutral foot type. So that's where you want to make it specific to foot type, condition, stress. Is it temporary or activity specific? And then can you supplement that with foot releasing, foot strengthening, barefoot stimulation, core strengthening, glute strengthening, so that you keep this integrated sensory mechanical foot function environment really as optimal as possible, because it ties into longevity. And there's a lot of research that shows prolonged use of orthotics leads to atrophy of the muscles of your feet. So if that's the case, if you use orthotics chronically and you ever get out of them, the chances of you getting hurt are much higher now because you became quote unquote dependent on the orthotics. So we want to make sure that we use them when we need it, but don't be dependent. And I'm trying to think of an analogy, because eyeglasses is not a good analogy, because you don't be dependent on them because you need them to see, where we don't really need the orthotic to walk, right? Because we should be able to strengthen our feet in the same sense. A good analogy would actually be a weight belt, because we're talking about the core. So with a weight belt, there is a time and place and appropriateness for a weight belt. But the appropriateness of the weight belt is built around the level of intra-abdominal pressure you need to create. And we all have a physiological ceiling to how much intra-abdominal pressure we can create with our core, right? And your pressure of your core, which equals stability, equals how much resistance you could lift, how much weight you could lift. And if you have a ceiling to the pressure, you technically have a ceiling to how much strength you could lift based off of that stability. So when you're looking at strongman competitions and some of the Olympic lifting, and they start pushing into these higher weights that are just crazy, the amount of weight that these people can lift or push, they have to use the weight belt, otherwise they wouldn't have sufficient spinal stability. Now, if you use a weight belt too early, you create a improper stabilization pattern, kind of like the orthotic, and it could actually make your muscles weaker because you're relying on it kind of like a corset, right? Like if you, or a corset would be actually a really good example as well, that women who wear the corsets actually get atrophy of their postural muscles. And looking historically when they used to wear a lot of corsets, that you would actually see that there would be spinal atrophy, spinal muscle atrophy in these women because they were relying on it for stability.
Yeah, really good point. I'm glad that you brought it back to the weight belt and the corsets or like waist trainers or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
When you mentioned about foot release and foot integration or something you had mentioned, what type of, I know like things like using a stability, or not a stability ball, like a lacrosse ball, what do you suggest for people if they want to do maybe some release work or some work to help massage those muscles, the muscles of the feet?
Absolutely. So this is where, you know, there are certain products that I like more than others, but I'm also very realistic that I will say, I just need you to do it. So if me saying I need you to use this specific tool is a barrier for you to do it and it decreases your compliancy, I don't care. You can put a rolling pin on the floor for all I care. It doesn't matter. But let's say in an ideal world, one of my favorite go-tos for releasing the feet is still a classic golf ball. And the reason is that it's a combination of the hardness of the ball and the size, where you start getting into the lacrosse balls, and the lacrosse ball is actually a little bit bigger than I like. And the reason is that when you stand on it, let's say 1 foot, it's really hard to stand on 2 lacrosse balls without it actually being like a balance exercise and having to hold on the counter. So, which is another reason why I don't like it. So if you do 1 foot at a time, because of the size, you actually throw off your hips. So ergonomically, it becomes less of a friendly release technique. When you use a golf ball, because it's smaller, one, it's easier to do 2 feet at the same time. It's just quite intense. Or if you do 1 foot, it's not going to throw off the level of your pelvis. Now, there's several companies that have smaller based release tools. And those are typically what I recommend to a patient if they feel that the golf ball is too hard. I'm not a fan of a tennis ball because it compresses too much. So if something is too compressive, you're just not going to get a proper release. And then another thing that I would mention to this is you actually don't want to roll the foot. And I know that I'm sure people will find many videos of me saying, oh, I recommend rolling your feet every day. Shame on me, it's not rolling. It's actually, you want to stand. I just do it because it's foam rolling. We think roll. We don't want to roll. You actually want to stand on one spot and think of it more as pinpoint release is the way that we want to do it. Or acupressure is different than like massage per se, right? Because you're holding on a trigger point or a spot. So if you find, and I have a video on YouTube that shows the exact release points, that if you find the release point, stay there for 30 seconds to a minute, and then go to the next release point. Stay there with your body weight, etc. And then you repeat through the foot that way. That provides a much better release. And I recommend releasing the feet 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening, every single day. do it when you're brushing your teeth or you're putting on your makeup or whatever. If you're cooking, you want to kind of kill two birds with one stone so that it becomes a lifestyle. This has to be a lifestyle, just like brushing your teeth is a lifestyle. If you make it where it's like, okay, every Monday at 8 a.m. I release my feet, the chances of that staying and being really a lifestyle is actually much lower. And that's honestly after just years of experience and trying to get patients and people to actually buy into this and do it consistently, is you have to make it easy for them. So what makes it easy is the doing it at the same time, 5 minutes, quick, stand there. You know, it's not like specific. There's not an exact art to it, so you can't do it wrong per se. I would just say try to do pinpoint release versus the rolling of the foot.
Okay, so I'm gonna, I guess, put a golf ball beside my toothbrush, and and that's what I'll incorporate every morning. Well, thank you so much, Emily. Where can everyone find you if you know, they want to learn more about your work?
Absolutely. So I'm on all the social media channels. Instagram is probably the most active. My personal page is at dremilydpm. And then my podiatry website is just my name. So dremilysplickle.com. And I've, you know, various other websites that I always say the easiest thing to do is to Google Dr. Emily barefoot, and you will get all of the links and the sites that you need.
Excellent. And I'm going to put them all in the show notes as well, so people will just be able to click right on them and go to you. So thank you so much for today. Lots of great pieces of information, and hopefully some lifestyle hacks that people will start using.
Excellent. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yes, I appreciate your time. Thanks a lot, Emily. Have a great day.